Ladies and gentlemen, look, there are two camps essentially you can fit into: early extenders and not early extenders or rotators. And the guy in your screen, if you're watching on YouTube or listening, Riley Andrews, there he is, handsome. He's here to help you. Riley, welcome to our show, man. How are you?
Thanks so much for having me on, Mark. It's great to see you. Doing awesome. Really excited to talk some shop with you today and hopefully help out some of your viewers.
Yeah, definitely. Before we do that, though, you got your gear on, the cool logo there. Stands for Elite Golf Schools. Tell us a little bit about Riley Andrews. Tell us about your golf schools. You're the founder. You're the owner of Elite Golf Schools, Arizona and Colorado. Tell us about you, how you came to where you are, please.
Yeah, I'll try to give you the quick Spark Notes version of that. Like a lot of guys that are doing what I'm doing right now, grew up playing golf at a junior level, played in college ranks at Will, started off at University of Colorado and was at Buffalo for a couple of years and then transferred to UCCS,
Okay.
University of Colorado Springs. And then as soon as I finished up my collegiate career, I turned professional and tried to play for about 2.5, 3 years or so, something like that. So I didn't have like a really long lasting professional career, if you will, in playing the game. But then I came to this point when I was 25, 26 years old going, I don't know what to really do with my life right now, right? Since the time I was 12 years old or so, I was wanting to play at the PGA Tour level. And that didn't happen. So I went, what's next? And I moved from Colorado down to Arizona in the hopes to continue to try to play professionally, but was working behind the counter, kind of looking to potentially give some lessons here and there, but really didn't do much, but was also looking to continue to try to play some. So it was kind of in this weird void, right? Where I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life.
Yeah.
And then I had a kiddo's father come in and just ask if I could give him a lesson. He knew kind of my background and what I was wanting to accomplish. And he just thought, hey, stand on the lesson tee with him for an hour or so and show him the ropes. And I went, what sounds really cool is instead of doing that, let me have him for like 90 days. Okay. And I can really show him the game, right? We can talk about on-course principles, obviously golf swing, putting, short game. Just golf is such a skill sport that just standing on the driving range, in my opinion, isn't necessarily the best way to teach somebody the game, especially at a junior level. Yeah. And what was really interesting, Mark, in about 60 days, I had this massive conflict, right? Where for 12 years, I wanted to play professionally. And then all of a sudden here comes like what I deem is my true calling in life now, and mentoring and hopefully inspiring juniors to play at really high levels, and also adults as well. But my real passion is growing the game from that standpoint. And shoot, that was about 10 years ago or so. Yeah, and now with a couple of states. So that's the quick version of kind of my background in the game.
Okay, I got to ask you this because I'm sure folks are listening, and the folks that are sort of on the western side of the USA or somewhat close to where you are in Arizona, it says Elite Golf Schools is the moniker. Is it only for elite players, or do you guys teach golfers of all skill levels?
All skill levels. My want, and I look at a lot, and there's some schools out there that are doing this, but there's not very many of them that can take a kid from a 10, 11, 12-year-old and shoot, Mark, they might not even know if they like golf or not. And we're there to help inspire them on why they would truly fall in love with the game. And that comes from just, here's a golf course, come hang out, enjoy just being around with your peers and coaches. But also the skill development of, hitting a solid 6-iron is like infectious. Yeah. And once that starts to happen, because of the skills that you learn, you start to like it, you start to love it, and then you can grow them. We want to create athletes that are able to go sign their NLI one day and go play college golf and beyond.
Yeah, and this always happens with me. I go into conversations with one thought in mind, and then I pivot because I listen to the insights that all of you bring to the show. And so I have to ask this now. The hook oftentimes that you get these youngsters or golfers that come and work out with you, it obviously varies, right? But golf is that kind of a game, and now I'm stepping on course before we get into the nuts and bolts of the golf swing stuff. Um, you made such a valid point about, there's the skill of playing the game correctly and reading the golf course and situation, all that sort of stuff, hitting quality shots. But golf is that sort of a game that beats you up more than it rewards you. So I'm keen for you to share a little advice to anybody who's listening to this, not just some junior or some scholar kid, to say, "Yo, I know it might be a little rough right now, but if you were under my wing and we went to the golf course, this is what I'd show you to just help you rediscover that passion or that love for the game."
Yeah, wow. What a very, very deep question and deep thought, right? And it's like, whoa, there's so many layers to that onion that you
Go
just
for it.
posed.
Do your thing, bro.
Yeah, so I think there's two differences, right? I would categorize players into either developing
All right.
or they're already developed and now they're looking to hone.
All
So
right.
this would be more an elite player, right? I think at the junior level, an elite player can be somebody that shoots in the 70s on the regular.
All right.
They've climbed that mountain, right, from being fairly poor or just whatever, shooting 100, 120, right, to then going to a good player is fairly simple.
Yeah.
Because in my book, again, a good player shoots somewhere probably between 80 and 90. You're good.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are simple skills, right? Like developing a golf swing, like, okay, teaching a player how the arms work from a novice to like now good is fairly simple. How the body can support the arm structure and the arm swinging freely, fairly simple. Overall putting stroke, fairly simple. Just understanding general, like, hey, hit it, when you're around the green, simple shots, all those things are fairly rudimentary.
I got you.
So going from poor to good, pretty easy. And you can almost see this track where they just go, whoa,
Yeah.
right? As long as they apply, they get really good. Now, once you become good, going from good to great is dangerous because that player's attitude in their mind is like, oh, okay, I just keep on going this way.
Yeah.
And it's just the case. You and I both know that. So giving them a better understanding of longevity in the game of it's kind of a side note, but it really, like, I think hits the nail on the head. My mentor, Doug Wary, when I was a 15-year-old, 16-year-old kid, and still one of my mentors to this day, the first thing he asked me, because I was already a fairly good player when I met him, we were on the course on hole 2. And he goes, what do you want out of the game? I go, I want to play on the PGA Tour. And he goes, that's great. Just understand that at your level right now, it's going to take you about 10 years if you practice on the proper things every day. And in my mind, as a 16-year-old, I went, what just happened to my life, right? That's forever. But it's so true because you need to better understand yourself as a human. You need to better understand the game. You need to understand your pattern. You need to understand all of these massive skills that it really takes to play at that extremely high level.
I understand.
Right? I think elite level players, it's really important to show them like that you don't need to be great right now or every day. You need to work towards greatness every day. And if you look at it that way, then I think it helps with your mindset on what you're willing to do from a training aspect and, taking the time to understand proper mindsets and all of those things that are like pretty deep when you look at PGA Tour players and how skilled they are in like the main areas.
Yeah.
I think that's how to go about it.
Hey, you use the term greatness, and even good, and I'm glad you qualified good because a lot of golfers, I believe, have misconceptions on what good really is. And I love the way you sort of broke it down as if to say, look, if you're shooting 90 to 80, you're a nice player. And above that, then you're becoming well advanced into the game because we can so easily view ourselves in a bad light. But I'm glad you referenced the greatness because greatness doesn't necessarily mean like heavenly and everything's perfect, right? And I think that's a big misunderstanding. You care to qualify a little bit over there because I'm glad you used the term greatness because the greatness I get to watch when I'm announcing, they're not on point all the time, but they make things happen. They find a way. They make smart decisions and stuff.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I mean, you see it day in and day out, week in and week out. You see the best players in the world. And what's really amazing is I mean, obviously they're great. So this statement's going to come off funny, but they're not that great. They're not as great as most people think.
Yeah, you're right.
And I think what's really interesting, and just kind of referencing junior players again, once they become like they're flirting with that good to becoming great or seeking greatness or touching greatness,
Mm-hmm.
I love the conversation with some kiddos. One of our kids, Rio Newcomb, a year or two ago, shot 63 in a tournament. And I go, please let me know how that went. Very curious to see how you played.
Okay, right.
And because most people think of 63 and they're like, man, I didn't miss. I hit 17 greens. I hit it to this all day. It was like the best day ever. Because I didn't hit it well. I hit 12 greens. I made a couple of 30+ foot putts on accident. I chipped it in twice and I made an eagle, and I didn't make any bogeys. Huge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting because, I mean, shoot, you think of like 12 greens, it's kind of on par with PGA Tour average, 12, 13.
Yeah.
And PGA
12 greens, folks, just to put a percentage on that, is 66%. All right. That's, yeah, it's hardly like you killing it on the greens hitting statistic.
You're right, exactly. And so shooting, seeking greatness or working towards greatness is an interesting mindset, because shooting 63 is kind of accidental in interesting ways, right? Your intent is obviously always to pick the right club, make the right decision, and then execute a good golf swing. But again, a good golf swing equates to about 62% of your fairways hit. That's PGA Tour average. I believe PGA Tour average in greens and reg is about 68%, which is kind of on par with that 12. So good golf swings doesn't always equate to hitting greens, making putts, hitting fairways. It's just executing on good decisions and good swings creates the potential for great scores.
Yeah, I was with a junior golfer over the weekend. Watched her play 9 holes, 6 out of 9 greens, hit in regulation, and shot 44. Okay, because the holes that she missed in bad spots and compounded errors. And you talked about the no bogeys, so that shows you too. And this is how I want to qualify greatness for folks. So good sometimes looks nasty. Great sometimes doesn't look so great, to your point. And I would almost venture, like you use the term accidental for that 63. I see all scores. It's like the good scores kind of happen. The scores when you don't have your good stuff, they are intentional. You can see these folks, they're grinding over shots. They're looking for the target they can get away with. It's not like they're just freewheeling and playing all laissez-faire. Do you agree with my observation there?
Yeah, it's so on point. And it's one of those things that it's almost difficult to articulate it unless you've done it before, because I think it sometimes can fall on deaf ears, because if somebody is shooting 80 consistently, their idea of what it takes to shoot 75, 19 times out of 20 is wrong. It's just not true. You just brought up 6 out of 9 greens, tour average again, and shot 44. So, and greens in regulation can sometimes be misconstrued. If you're playing Augusta National, that's fantastic. Those greens are like the size of the hitting bay that I'm standing in right now. But if you go play St. Andrews and somebody goes, hit it in the middle of the green, well, enjoy hitting 60 and 70 foot putts all day, right? It's like quantifying this stuff. That's why I love decade golf and Scott Fawcett. I mean, he's quantified this stuff to really understanding what good strategy is and what good shots really are at elite levels. But I think, again, going from 80 to 75, a player just eliminating double bogeys or above from their game can get them there. Not more birdies or more pars, oftentimes.
Look at that, folks. You got yourself a course management and attitude lesson from Riley before we got even into the subject matter. Nice job. Look, golf is about golf, and I don't care how good your golf swing is. You've said so. It's about having a manageable miss. It's about understanding what you do. Now, along those lines, I'll keep in the juniors because we'll just segue into the concept. I've seen I started teaching golf in 1996, so I'm dating myself now. So many juniors, I know you've seen them. They show up with clubs that are too big, too heavy, and they instantaneously, so they don't hit the ground, develop the habit of sort of having to early extend. They're up on their toes, the pelvis shoots underneath them. They're making themselves as tall as possible through contact so they don't strike the ground. Then they grow up some and they've still got that, and they're wondering now. Some teacher goes, well, there's early extension and stuff. Yet this poor golfer has been doing this for now 5, 6, 7, 8 years, even, right? Now they've got to change a motor pattern. So now you said to me you wanted to talk about um, the matchups of hip extension and tilt versus hip flexion and rotation. So essentially early extenders and the folks who then rotate and bend versus each other. But I want to ask you this before we start there. For all golfers who've seen their swing or they've heard from a teacher their early extenders, let's say we're breaking them down into these two areas. How much crossover are you trying to see? Like if a person naturally plays good golf and has got a reliable ball flight pattern and stuff, and they early extend, do you massage them and keep them there, or you try and work them over into the place where they're holding angles and become a bit more rotary through contact?
Again, dude, you ask good questions. That's great.
I've been in golf since Moby Dick was a minnow.
No, this is such a great conversation because, and I'm interested to ask you too, because as a coach who is seeking to provide information for players that are wanting to play at the PGA Tour level and you know, at least the collegiate level and potentially beyond. Mm-hmm. It's always, I'm asking myself the question all the time, what do I apply here to make them better? Mm-hmm. And I think rule number one, before we even get into that question, as a coach, if you are coaching elite level players, your first rule is not to screw them up. Rule number one.
Nailed it.
Don't screw them up. Yep. Right. It's so important, you know, because as instructors, you know, we love diving into the craziness and hack motion and the information that it can provide. TrackMan's cool. All these technologies are awesome. So it's easy to then get excited about that information and want to relay it to your players. But you need to decide what of that information that player needs to be relayed to, right? If that makes sense. So getting to that question, developmental players, again, super fun. It's almost like likening it to a block of wood, right? Somebody just hands you like a 10-inch by 10-inch by 10-inch block. You can just take your axe out and start carving away, and they don't have a motor pattern yet. Yeah. They don't have a JT Thomas and I were talking about this the other day, a hit pattern, like how they're hitting something hard, right? Gotcha. Like how I deliver the golf club into the golf ball. Some players are like heavy with their arms, like pulling on the golf club to shoot the golf club and shoot the energy into it. Other ones are rotators and the arms almost sling off. That's their hit mechanism. Yeah. They don't have that. So you can build all of that. One of the things with the crossover, like you were talking about, I don't liken it necessarily to extension tilt, which, by the way, tilt I define as L spine or lower spine bending.
Gotcha.
Right. Tilt in my mind.
Gotcha.
Bending in the thoracic or C spine, so kind of from like the ribs up, that's all bend in my book from my ability to quantify that, right? And that absolutely happens, and I love seeing it. Like you look at a guy like Neiman, crazy amounts of bend. Trevino had tons of bend. So this like extension, tilt versus flexion, extension and flexion, by the way, we're talking about the hips. Yeah. Versus hip flexion and rotation is a spectrum.
So I get you, right? Mm-hmm.
Yep. So we've got like, and ends of so spectrums I love because they're bookends, and I can play in this area then as a coach and a player. So it's like, oh, I don't have to like seek perfection with like the degrees and like the flexion of the lead wrist at the top and blah, 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 blah. None of that, right? It just doesn't work. It takes away somebody's athleticism when they start thinking that way. But they're bookends, so I can't bounce outside either bookend. Like in my opinion, if you look at the best players in the world right now, you got guys like Jimmy Walker, who is more of an early extension tilt type of player.
Yeah.
but he plays PGA Tour golf and he wins PGA Tour tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
So who is anybody to say that that pattern is wrong? That would be ridiculous, right? It's a great pattern. It's awesome. But then you have the other end of the spectrum. So like, well, Mito and Joaquin are over here. That like you watch their head level, it drops tremendously. They rotate big time into impact, and they play on the PGA Tour. So I'm not saying that necessarily one is better than the other. I definitely have my preference, and what I like to see. Mito and Joaquin are friggin' amazing movers and athletes. I also think it's more of it's a healthier tendency pattern over here when we're talking about spine health.
Okay.
Compared over here with extension tilters. You look at like Jason Day, you've got some back problems. In my opinion would say that it's based on maybe his motor pattern in his golf swing.
Yeah.
I could argue that in certain ways. So
Well, that's a good
that
point. I want to spring in there quickly because that's a good point. Because when he was working with Colin Swadden for the longest time and Reliable got to world's #1, back issues all the time, and then he's hooked up with Chris Como over the last year and so, and you can see the change in the swing, how he's playing. You know, the legs underneath him are moving differently. He's rotating on a tilt a little bit more than what he used to. He's not, losing the pelvis underneath him through the golf ball and creating that massive high launch angle. So, yeah, what you say, they're so well founded because he's just moving inside of his spectrum. He was here and he's just moving a little closer to kind of midway. It's not like he's over on the other side where he's flexed and rotated all day long.
yeah. And to the naked eye, most people would go, looks the same, right?
Exactly.
Like again, his hit mechanism, which is kind of what we see, just again, naked eye, not taking a camera and putting lines on, oh, what P5 looks like, and then into P7, here's the difference in the angle. Just looking at it, you're still going to see the same athlete in there. Just like with Tiger's evolution of his golf swing is like amazing to look at, but it still looks similar from 97 all the way till now, right? There's things that he's had to change for various different reasons, or things that he just wanted to change for various different reasons. But the overall hit of Tiger, it's still Tiger,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, no, that's very, very well put, and I think a perfect sort of a mandate and a caution to anyone listening to this, because everyone wants to do better, correct? And then they hear someone smart like Riley Andrews, and he likes it one way. The next thing is poor golfers trying to do stuff that they're unable to do consistently. They might pull it off once or twice, but on uneven lies for any extended period of time, it's highly unlikely they're going to do it. So I'm glad you dropped that caution in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this is really important too. This is
Okay.
something I want to bring up, and this that's a perfect segue to this. I think the difficulty that most players have and most coaches have is they don't recognize the umbrella of movement that a player has if they're a good player already.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If they're not a good player, again, we can go ahead and develop anything that we want with to for the most part, right? You can just develop it. But if you're a player again that's pretty darn good, you're shooting below 80 and can golf your ball at that level, you probably hit the golf ball fairly well.
Yeah.
So you just need to understand what your movement is about, the things that you should implement into your swing. So there's a filter here, and I can filter this in, or it's deflected. Because like we go back to Jimmy Walker and Neiman, right? Really good examples, I think, because what Neiman is working on, I have no idea what it is that he's feeling or thinking about, but I can promise you, I guarantee you, it's going to be different than Jimmy Walker.
Flat out, man. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I guarantee it, because Jimmy Walker's hit and the way that he moves to get into that hit is different than Neiman. So what Neiman feels will not work for Jimmy Walker, and vice versa. But again, both great athletes.
Yeah.
So it's not this thing where you're just going, give me it, right? And I'm just going to try this out. Do not just try anything out. If you're a high level player, you need to analyze it first, better understand it, and then you can implement it if it works with the rest of your puzzle.
Yeah. Amen. Well said, man. That is so appropriate. And then to realize that just tiny increments have a huge, not just the imagine an infected area. Don't just uh, adjust the infected area. They have far-reaching effects throughout the golf swing, which moves me to how I reached out to you, and I'm like, I want to talk about matchups, and some crucial matchups to good ball striking. So you're like, oh, I see your matchups, and I'm going a little farther, with how the body moves, which I love, because you've got kind of like the core and the inside of the being, and then what the golfer does to propel the golf ball. So let's talk about those folks who sort of early extending everything, straightening up, and more slingers of the golf club. Talk about one or two matchups if now you are sitting on that side of the spectrum. So talk to those folks a little and say, look, you might want to consider this in terms of how the club face sits, ball position, all those sorts of things, or things that pop to your mind, please.
Beautiful. I think that's great. So on that note, I got to bring this into the equation.
Do it, bro.
Just randomly.
It's the only way you get to communicate with a golf ball. You better.
Right, exactly. Right. This is a tool. It's a tool, just like a hammer is, right? And what I think the biggest thing in anything that we're always talking about as coaches or instructors of the game is understanding that if you can do pretty much three things with this, then you can hit very good shots on the regular. Number one, we're looking to control the face. So the club face's rate of rotation, where the instrument is bottoming out, like how it's descent to its lowest point, and then it starts ascending again. And then finally, the path that the golf club is coming in at. Yeah. Now, the path meaning its descent angle, the angle of attack into the golf ball, but also the path that it's approaching from. Is it coming from an inside path, an outside path, whatever, right? So anything that we're looking to change in the golfer is meant to improve the player's ability to manage the instrument.
Yeah.
Then we dive into two different systems. We have the arms, hands, and club system, which swing the instrument or swing the club. And then the body is there to support the swinging action of the arms, hands, and golf club. Yeah. So we have these two different systems that help control the three things that we need to do with the golf club. So matchups with, I think we talked about or started talking about more of an early extension, kind of an athlete who's going to have more of a tilt type pattern, and the tilt pattern is going to prevent chest rotation for longer. So you're going to have a guy that tends to stay taller in his golf swing almost throughout the entirety of it. As we get over into like flexion rotation, by the way, we're still going to talk, there's still extension. Yeah. It just happens later. It's just later than the early extenders. So we're just talking about this early type pattern. Early meaning from like P4. And for those of you that don't know the P system, that's the top of the backswing. And then as a right-handed player, you would look at the right hip almost immediately going out towards the ball line, right? Which is going to keep my head high.
In some cases, it almost raises even farther from where it was at address, right?
Exactly. And again, there's bookends. If we're outside that bookend, we want to push back in. You'll see some guys that almost add hip flexion in the backswing, and that they lose their space away from the golf ball. And the space that I'm talking about is almost where the sternum is to where the ball is, that distance. Yeah. So if I'm losing that flexion, or I'm gaining flexion and losing that extension in the backswing, I've got to create that space pretty early. And that would be an early extension type of an athlete.
Exactly.
With that being said, you're going to have guys that have earlier shoulder extension. So shoulder flexion is that action. This is flexion, extension of the shoulder.
So you're going to one sec for the folks listening on audio only. What Riley just showed was where the arm basically raising from his right shoulder, and then the arm dropping. So you're talking flexion and extension there.
Yep, exactly. And one of the easiest things to really see this, just hop on the internet and type in shoulder extension and flexion. I get a lot of questions on those either on our Instagram or DMs or whatever. It's much easier to just see that and hop on there and just like Google, boom, boom, flexion extension. But in essence, what shoulder extension provides is you now start to shoot the forces in the club downward because you're tall. So now I can get to the golf ball more appropriately. So I have somewhat of a bottom out control because of that. You're going to have a higher rate of rotation in the club face most of the time, unless you drag on the handle for longer, but then you lose speed. Most people don't do that. But The matchups there are, I would call an early extension tilt type of an athlete, also the chances of them being fairly heavy in the arm swing hit pattern is a higher probability.
Well, I mean, I would counter what you say or even agree, but then just put a exclamation point on that to say, look, when you're into that extension thing and the body's not really rotating, and maybe the lead shoulder starts raising some, you know what they kind of get like. The only way you're propelling the club at is by stalling the handle and swinging with the arms at tight, you know, swinging the arms and kind of getting a bit busy with the wrists. It's almost necessary just to keep the club moving around the arc.
Yes, exactly. And it's interesting too, just looking at like the evolution of golf instruction for a long time in the 90s, even early 2000s, there was a heavy tendency in most coaches looking at like the lead forearm working into more of a supination type of a release pattern.
Sort of a rolling
Which,
up, yeah. Mm-hmm.
yep, exactly. So it's a heavier rate of rotation in the club face,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't with that pattern, you're not going to be a flexion rotator. You're not. You've got to create the space. So you need to be taller to be able to, like, when you supinate here hard, it's going to shoot all the energy out earlier. So you need the space to do so.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm lowering and turning, and I early supinate and adduct the lead arm early to shoot that golf club out. I'm going to run the golf club into the ground 2 feet prior to the ball. So you have to be in an earlier hip extension type of a
And
movement.
then sort of along those lines, because what you're describing for the guys on YouTube can see this easily. For the folks listening, if you're in the car or whatever, Riley's showing, you know, the body raising and then the arms kind of rolling over a little bit. Basically, in layman's terms, I want to ask you about club face because, you know, back when I was younger, you know, everyone kind of had the dangling toe at the top of the backswing. The face was more open, had something you can sort of slam shut and use your arms a bit more. Honestly, the golf ball dictated some of that, as did, you know, the way the shafts of the clubs would torque. Nowadays, there's less of it, but you have the internet, and there's a bunch of really loud folks out there who are saying, well, you have to play with a super flex wrist at the top, a la Dustin or Brooks or Victor Hovland, these sorts of guys. But if you're an early extender, having the face that shut is going to give you some issues, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, because early extension. So the way that matchup works, so what you're talking about with the lead wrist being flexed shuts the face.
Yeah, bow, yeah, yeah. The wrist
That
bows in the
bow,
face. Yeah.
yep, exactly. That bow shuts the face down. So that is the matchup there would be chest rotation, thoracic and C-spine rotation.
Yeah.
And what that would help with, so we'll just keep talking about a right-handed player instead of just talking lead and trail side.
All right.
Right-handed player, the club head would be on the player's. So let me describe this in a better way for those that are driving. If I'm the club's in front of me at setup. It's in front of my chest.
Yes.
As soon as I start to swing it into my backswing, the club head gets on my right side.
Yes.
It's over here. It's on the right side. That would be a loaded position. If I have a flexed or a bowed lead wrist or left wrist, it shuts the face. So I need, as a rotator, then to rotate my chest to bring that golf club into impact. So the club more or less stays on my right side to rotate into impact.
Yeah. Yeah. The club's essentially always more behind you and you turning it through contact. Where the open face guys, the Jack Nicklaus's, the Louis Oosthuizens, I worked with Larry Myers for a long time. You know, thing was open at the top and they'd move left and then they'd turn, but they'd turn later and the club would get slung, almost thrown a little bit more. And Nicholas said that's kind of what he tried to feel like he was doing.
Yep, exactly. And so you talk about these. I mean, Larry Mize is one of the most beautiful swingers of the golf club you'll ever see. Faldo is another one.
Yeah.
Swings it beautifully, right? And you look at, the lead wrist is almost in a bit of extension, and the club face is more open, and definitely more open than you'd see in like a DJ or Morikawa or Hovland or any of those guys that are more bowed down. And again, the last thing I ever want to do is come across like I'm taken away from those amazing, they're great, right? Like unbelievable players. We have an athlete in our academy. It's Rio again, actually, who plays with an even more, like a greater amount of extension in the left wrist.
Okay.
Ryokan is a player. He's already a great player. I'm not going to change that because it's going to change his hip pattern,
Yeah.
right? We'll never change it. We'll never change it. And he hits the golf ball extraordinary. The rate of rotation of the face is higher. There's high rate of rotation players on the PGA Tour.
Mm-hmm.
They're great, right? So I think it's just kind of going back to the main point, just understanding what that matchup yields is so important for the player and the coach to better understand. Gotta know the
what you say there is so apropos, folks. I mean, and Riley started this entire conversation by saying, "I'm going to get this," and he pulled the golf club out and said, "Look, this thing needs to return back to a certain attitude for you to hit a certain ball. It's got to come in on an appropriate path. The face needs to be decent, and the landing point is super important. If you're early extending, not out of bounds, within your spectrum, and you can square that thing up consistently, then you're okay. And you must make very fine tweaks. It's never anything wholesale. Like, let's say if you get some guy who comes in, let's say me, I'm old school, and the wrist is perhaps a little too extended. We just neutralize that thing a whisker. It's not going from one side of the spectrum all the way to the other, right?
Oh, geez. Yeah, exactly. And I will tell you, I would fight pretty hard in a discussion where I don't know if that's ever worked.
No.
I mean, Tiger, just the look of it again, Tiger in 97 had the club a bit more across the line. And it got to neutral in like 99, 2000, neutral. But to me, all that they really did is change his trail arm. It got into extension just a bit more, and I would bet dollars to donuts that all they did, he and Butch talked a lot. Tiger probably he talks about it a lot, just feeling stuff in his hands, how there's more load in that trail hand, meaning like once that trail hand goes into extension, eventually it creates extension of the trail humerus.
Yeah.
Whereas you see Tiger, a lot of different scap stuff to get the golf club across the line. That's the main difference that I see in the backswing that then led to the difference in feels through impact.
I've just looked at the time. I kept you for so long. It's been so good. Just to move to the other side of the spectrum, and now we're talking guys like Neiman, for argument's sakes, even JT to a certain extent, even though the feet are pushing up so hard, there's all of that bend and open rotation. You see a lot of the modern day golfers, Victor Hovland is one. Talk about some matchups required there. Obviously, a stronger club face is one.
Sure.
The thought with them is more rotate, wouldn't you say?
You bet. You bet. So I've got to throw one guy into this that has helped me with my understanding of this. We have a doctor that we're lucky enough to work with. His name is Luke Brackey. And he is tremendous when it comes to better understanding the body and how it in the big scheme of things is working, and how all of these different movement patterns will almost affect or make other movement patterns happen, or vice versa, not to stall out a movement pattern.
Gotcha, yeah.
And you'd have to talk to him because I can't remember all of his language, but with flexion in the hips, there's a ligament on our anterior side, so that would be our front side, that when you fall or go into more hip flexion or like a squatting pattern, it relaxes that ligament and it allows for rotation in through what we call the slings, which is, if you look up spiral line, it's a fascial track that goes underneath my scap or over the top of the scap, goes under the armpit, and then crosses over like it's making like an X right in the abdomen.
Yeah.
And it's cool because just the visual of that, how fascial lines work, it's almost like if you pull on it, it loads it. And then if you just let go of a rubber band, boom, it just unloads on its own. And that's more or less, it's a rudimentary way of explaining how those like muscle tracks and fascial lines work to load and unload. But working into that flexion state is going to soften out the spine and tend to keep the spine more into a neutral or slightly flexed position, which is rounding, right? Extension of the spine is more of a broad, like chest up kind of a look.
Gotcha.
That helps with facet joint problems, which is the majority of where injuries come from when it comes to spine injuries in our game in golf, because once you go into extension and rotate, no good on the spine.
Yeah.
And the lower down you do that into the L spine, they're just not meant for that kind of torque and movement down there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you get inflammation problems and a whole set of stuff. It's just a cataclysm of bad.
Yeah.
So how we're moving is really important, because it's not just because I prefer to see this, it's because, one, it's healthy. I want players playing until they're 80, 85 and feeling good. They develop a pattern that doesn't disturb their quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, what we see with flexion rotators is a softer or a slower rate of rotation in the club face.
And
Meaning,
I would say that they're right-handers, the right elbow, the right wrist, those things are staying bent a little while longer. It's not like they're having to straighten up and sling the club there through to get the thing back to the ball. Yeah. Just like,
exactly. Little tennis elbow
yeah.
comes from that. That's an extension throw kind of a pattern. And that's where some of those elbow injuries also come into play.
Yeah.
You don't see that out of flexion rotators. And then the bottom out is pretty simple. It's the bottom out for a lot of extension tilters, because as soon as I extend, my pelvis is going to go lateral because it's going this way. And then as I turn it, it's going to go target side and my ribs fall back.
Yeah.
That would be the matchup just from again, balance point. The ribs, the center of mass, and the pelvis center of mass just work in opposition to keep me in balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the bottom out point for those athletes comes from the pelvis, because they're going to shoot their pelvis forward to control the bottom.
Yeah.
The flexion rotator, it's more from the ribs. So the ribs would sway and fall forward. So where my sternum is at impact would more or less affect where the bottom out is.
Understood.
So it's a different way of doing it. But again, we're going back to, like, we want to control face, path, and bottom out to create a great player. You can do those in both patterns. It's just from a standpoint of how am I going to develop somebody? Developing them, I'm going to push them towards this end of the spectrum of flexion rotation because of those reasons.
You've done such a nice job of explaining it all and putting it into context. Now, I think for a lot of the folks, the takeaway would sort of be, okay, this is where I fit, maybe move to the center of the spectrum and maybe a little better, but again, no real wholesale changes. I've kept you for so long, but I'm sure the folks are fascinated. You've got school to describe to us where the schools are, how they can reach out to you guys, how they follow you, website, social media, and that sort of thing, please.
Sure. So we're located in the Phoenix area.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a location at Dove Valley Ranch, which is in Cave Creek, which is kind of the northern metro area, and then another one on the southern metro area, Power Ranch Golf Club in Gilbert.
All right.
And then we also partner with an academy in Colorado in the Denver metro area, Lone Tree Golf Club in South Metro.
Yeah.
And again, Doug Wary still is there, one of my mentors and one of my favorite people in the world, is still the owner and founder up there and coaches a ton. So those are our three locations currently, and looking to expand as we keep going, man.
Fantastic. And please share the web address and where they can find you on social media.
Yep, it's elitegolfschools.com. Social media is Elite Golf Schools. And on our Insta, we're it's more of an educational platform. So anytime we think about anything that we're like, oh, that's kind of cool, or we give a swing evaluation that went really well, then we want to take some of those snippets and then blast it so we can help more and more people, man.
Folks, check them out. That's how I found Riley. Hey, and I wanted to say this too. On the social media and stuff, it's you guys are giving online lessons too. Am I correct in my understanding there? So folks can reach out to you digitally for lessons.
Yes, we are. It's I got to tell you, it's really fun. I think it helps, because when we're talking to somebody over FaceTime or Zoom,
mm-hmm.
I start talking, they come right back into the camera and they're listening and trying to things. It's like hit and then rake one over, and you're trying to explain something, they got to look in the camera again, and it works really, really well. So we've helped people in Japan and Australia and New Zealand and South Africa, just all over the world, which is just a pleasure, because now our outreach is that much greater than just local.
All right, Global on the Mark tribe. you can get a lesson from this guy and his colleagues. Riley, thank you so much for your time, mate. That was tremendous and really put some context to what is a really noisy subject right now that to me is very much misunderstood by everyone on social media. Thank you.
Mark, thanks so much for having me on, man. It was great to meet you and chat with you for a while. I appreciate it.